Hey guys, just 1 second. I'm trying to get my iPad to sync up. It's not starting the stream. I need to turn the volume down on that. Sorry, I'm so tech savvy. I actually am in most aspects of life. There we are. I was expecting to get an ad or something, and there was no ad. Can everyone hear me okay? Is this thing on? Hello, hello. Cool. Well, let me get to some of these questions that were here waiting for me. Appreciate you guys joining me here, impromptu, kind of, sort of, on a Tuesday. I was going to do one last Saturday, but a dishwasher install went sideways because the previous person who had installed everything had hidden a lot of things back in the back, things, shims that were not supporting anything or being supported by anything, or just, it's a long laundry list of cheats they thought would never matter or never be seen. So what could have been a 1-hour job turned into an afternoon. Story of my life and home ownership in general. Travis McCartney says something that means a lot to me. Thanks for sharing everything here. He's been able to take a 68 custom Princeton from a noisy amp to what he thought he was buying when he purchased a Princeton. He says, thanks. I say, you're very welcome. And I'm glad. That's one of the primary reasons I do this. Is it's not to show off what I do. It's so that you, the musician, the guitarist, and I like to think I'm still one of you guys, if I don't hit this on the light over there, can fix a lot of the stuff yourself, or at least recognize what an issue is, and also avoid the real turds out there. Clyde Broadway, hey man, says, what are some of the most unique sounding amps I've worked on? That is a great question. Some old Magnetones with the stereo pitch tremolo vibrato circuit. Vibrato tremolo. Fender got those backwards. I should say tremolo. That's a really unique sound, as it is a good example of an early 60s Fender harmonic tremolo, which is not stereo, but it's quite cool. Speaking of the Magnetones, the new ones, the Twilighters, etc., they're close. The tremolo has the right sound. The rest of the amp is essentially a Fender circuit that they've stuck the Magnetone tremolo into, which is not at all the same thing as the old Magnetone circuit. A really good condition, well, not really good condition, a 58 5E3 Deluxe that belongs to a studio in town, Sun Studios. You might have heard of them. Birthplace of a lot of good music. I restored that for them and optimized that particular amp for guitar rather than whatever Leo could have sold you in 1958 that needed to be amplified. And that came out really well. There's a video on my channel of Logan playing that. That's a really uniquely great sounding amp, as was that 62 AC15 I restored about 2 years ago. That would really, you don't get a chance to hear a lot of JMI era AC15s really working at their peak performance. And I was able to tap into that and come extraordinarily close to that in the Excalibur 15, though of course most people can't get that, and I'm unable to make them quite yet. So I hope to revisit that. So that particular sound can be heard and experienced by more. Other unique amps. Most amplifiers aren't that unique in sound. Pretty much, there's about 6 archetypes of guitar amps sounds that people want, and many of the amps out there do their version of that. There are differences, say the orange tone stack versus the Fender tone stack. But most people try, when they have an orange, they're trying to dial it in kind of what a Fender would have given you. I would include high watt in unique sounding amplifiers, say the DR103. It's definitely one where you want to use both channels at once. Otherwise, it's way too dark or way too bright. Not a set and forget kind of thing. But part of the joy of this, for me at least, is that sense of discovery, that process of learning how this amplifier works and sometimes how to trick it into giving the sound that you want. Let's see. Nate Satana says, "Hey, Lyle. Thanks for all the great content. Thanks for being here, Nate." Not Nate. I'm sorry. Forgive me. This is right at the bad range of my vision. It's far enough away that anyway. Natas Satana. Natas. Sorry about that. Hello, Natas. My 1975 Super Reverb has allowed rattle when I use the tremolo at the reverb rather. I said tremolo because I read intensity next. Let me start this one again. Natas Satana says, "Hey Lyle, thanks for all the great content. You're welcome. My 1975 Super Reverb has allowed rattle when I use the reverb at any intensity. Swap the tank for an MOD 2-spring medium decay and still has same issue." Well, it could be the cables. In fact, it's most likely to be the cables. It could also be a bad solder joint in the reverb circuit. On a 75 Super Reverb, one of the things you want to look for is the reverb driver cathode resistor. In the 60s amps, which tend to have the best sounding reverb circuit and to last a lot longer, they had a 2.2 resistor bypassed by a 25 microfarad capacitor. I don't recall the exact year when they switched, but I believe it was like 72, 73. Most of the Silverface era Fenders with reverb changed that. So instead of having a 2.2K bypassed by 25 microfarad, they just have a 470 ohm, sometimes a 680 ohm resistor unbypassed. And that is operating the tube at a much hotter bias. Gives about the same AC output, but the DC operating level is much higher. And it's very stressful for the 12AT7, and it's very stressful for that resistor. They often fail. And before they outright fail, they can go intermittent, which might be what you have, in which case you just replace that single resistor with a 2.2K bypass by 25 microfarad. In fact, if you look for the car, I believe it was a Rambler that I did about a year ago on here, it's one of the only car videos on the channel. The amp came in with a defective reverb because they had copied the 70s circuit with a single resistor, and I changed it to the 60s circuit with the resistor bypassed by a cap, and all the problems went away. So that's something to look at. Brad makes fun of me for giving long, rambling answers to these questions. I don't know how to give informative answers quickly, apparently, but I'll err on the side of giving you information at the risk of being long-winded. Natas also asked, what speakers would I recommend for the Super Reverb? He swapped the original speakers for Eminence Patriots. He guesses they sound okay. He plays heavy metal and heavy rock and grunge. Heavy rock and grunge. The Eminences can be quite good. I don't remember which Patriot is the 10-inch. Of the Eminences in Super Reverbs, I like the 1058 and the 1078. The Warehouse WG10C is also a very good choice. The best sounding speaker for Super Reverb, in my opinion, remains the old CTS 10-inch Alnico. And if you can find them, they're inexpensive to have reconed, and that is a glorious thing. The Jensen, the new Italian Jensens that they have are pretty good, but they tend to be quite bright even after they've broken in. So they are a good sound. I would go with the Eminence, maybe even the Little Buddy. I've heard good things about that, or the 1058 or 10. Is it 1078, 1028? One of those, whichever one of those is Alnico, though it does have a smaller voice coil than the old CTS Alnicos. And I've put the G10Cs in a lot of them, and people tend to love them. But if you like the sound of the Patriots, keep them. I mean, changing speakers in a Super Reverb can be quite expensive. You can also sometimes have one pair on the bottom and a different pair on top, as long as you like the combined sound and get different sounds in recording just by which speaker you put the microphone on. Rocking Chair Boogie's about to do some fun yard work in the Boot Heel, Missouri. Not too far from me. Okay, Michael P. is there in Sebastian, Florida. Cheers from Newfoundland, Alaska, South Carolina, Sydney. Hello there, Brad, Travis, Mark, and David, reverse respectively. And Niagara Falls, there, Barry and Chris in Philadelphia. Wow. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate that. Has Jason Hobbs asked, has a Wizard amp ever come across my bench? No, I have not had any Wizards yet. I don't know whether that means that they're all just incredibly, remarkably reliable, or that there just aren't that many out there in the wild. Aside from Malcolm Young, I'm not familiar with any notorious Wizard users. I think I only had one for a while. Malcolm Young's was some like 200-watt monstrosity. But no, I have not had any Wizards. I'd like to. Stephen Heidelberger asks, what brand solder do I use? I use Kester 6040. Just 1 second, let me find a roll, and I'll tell you exactly what I use for most things. Because there's a tip here. Here it is. All right. Does that come up? No, I've got it. I've got the autofocus off. Sorry. It is Kester SN 60 PB 40. You know, it's the leaded stuff, the good stuff. 0.031. And I love it because for very small things, I can feed just the right amount. If I need to feed more, I can double it. And then I instantly have pretty much a thicker, 0.062, so I can feed quite a bit. And if I'm doing a lot at once, if I'm trying to do a chassis connection, I will actually fold it over, I'll length over twice and twist it all up. And then I've got quite a bit of solder to feed in at once. But if this way, I don't have to stock all kinds of different diameters of solder, though I have done that in the past and probably will do so again. But it's nice to be able to make one roll do a number of things. And I've tried just using the 0.06, whatever. I find that this is the best balance. It's you can always add more. It's hard to take away. Nick Sarah asked a very interesting question, and I'll try to skim over the answer because the real answer is long. Could you please explain what effect cathode bypass caps have on preamp and power tubes? Thanks. There is the DC operation of a tube, which is the voltage present at the plate. The voltage will then be set at the cathode by whatever resistance is there, which locks in a certain voltage at the cathode. You can also use a diode or an LED for that if you just want to say, all right, this diode is a 1.8 volt drop. This Fender's got a 1.5K. It's actually risen to 1.7K. I like the sound of that. Wow, it's right there at 1.8 volts. I could replace that with a 1.8 volt voltage drop LED if I wanted to, in which case it's full bypass. You don't need to add a capacitor, but I digress. So that's the DC operation where you have X voltage at the plate, Y voltage at the cathode, and I'm simplifying a lot. So if anyone is like, well, actually, there's the, and that basically tells the triode how much to amplify any incoming signal. But you can trick the triode into amplifying more if you give a bypass cap across that resistor, which lets The AC stuff get amplified more while keeping the tube itself operating at the same DC level. And so you can do that. You can put like a 25 microfarad cap typically to get full bypass. So all audio frequencies get amplified even more, but the DC operation of that triode is still at an area where the tube's not biased so hot that the triode might begin to degrade. And that gives you the opportunity to say, well, what if I don't want to amplify all frequencies evenly? What if I want to amplify everything over 700 hertz more than everything below 700 hertz? That's when you get into smaller cathode bypass caps. You can sculpt the sound there. It's a really deep subject. To really understand it, you need to learn how to plot out all the tube curve characteristics and different biasing and all this fun stuff. And then you got to get all the formulas to say, all right, how do I shift the negative 3 dB point for whatever my high pass frequency is. So I could talk about this another 3 hours, but it'd be best if you read books on this because it's nice to have it in front of you and be able to go back and say, I don't understand that point right there. Oh, so I would point most people to Merlin Blanco's website, thevalvewizard.co.uk. And he's got a free PDF sample chapter from one of his books. And it's basically this subject, how a triode works and how you choose all the different values at different voltages to get a certain characteristic. And part of that is the cathode bypass cap choice or choices. So I hope that helps a little bit, but seriously, it'd be 3 hours just on that one subject. And I need to have charts and graphs. And I bet Uncle Doug has something on that too. He likes his white papers. Let's see. Thoughts on Valve Storm JTM45 kits? Clovergrass asks. He just bought a newly built one. Or she, I don't know. Forgive me. Clover's an unknowable name. And I never try to assume that all my guitar subscribers are male. I would welcome more female guitarists and musicians in general. I have no experience with, anyway, back to this question. I have no experience with the Valve Storm kits, but I know the parts that they use, and they do a lot of stuff in conjunction with the Metro amps form. So I would expect them to be quite good if built correctly. Thanks, Sarah. Hello? Sorry. I knew glasses, but they're right where things get fuzzy, and I don't want to hold the screen up to my face the whole time. So, where do you recommend purchasing a good quality assortment of resistors to start building my stock? Thanks. It depends on how seriously you want to get into this. If you want to get into this seriously, you want to go to Mauser.com. And if you're just starting out, for most resistors in a guitar amplifier, not the stuff in the power section where you want to use 1 watts, 2 watts, 3 watts and stuff, but 90% of the resistors in a guitar amp, you want a half watt. You can use metal film, you can use carbon film. You can use 1 watts if you want, 3/4 watts. 1/2 watts the minimum. You want to look at right now, the best starting point price wise versus performance wise would probably be a company called Yageo or Yageo, Yageo. But it's a lot to sort through to find the ones you want, or even to know if the ones that you want are the ones you want. So if you're more casual about this, I would suggest going to Tube Depot, TubeDepot.com, because they sell Zycon half watt and 1 watt carbon film resistors, and they also have some half watt metal films. And the prices are great, especially if you buy more than 10 of something. And you can say, I'm going to get 20 10Ks and 20 22Ks, and I don't need a 24K, but I need some 27Ks. Choose your own stash. And it really depends on what amps you work on the most. That'd be the easiest thing. I've seen companies like, tubesandmore.com that have the big package of resistors that you can buy with all the resistors you'll ever need. A lot of them are values you won't ever use. It's best to target things. If you were to go and look at the little labels on my resistor collection up there, I've got the most common ones in the storage bins up there. You'd find that there are values that are not there because I rarely need them. So the values that are there are the values used in Fenders, Foxes, and Marshalls for the most part. So a lot of 33Ks, no 37Ks, stuff like that. And I buy 200 at a time of each um, value that I need. So that'd be crazy for most people to buy. It's like when people ask me what kind of wire I use. Well, the wire I'd recommend that you buy is probably different than the wire I use, or maybe the same wire just sold in per foot, because I buy rolls of them. I buy huge spools of them. When you get to the level, I'm not saying I'm Mr. Important or blah, blah, big shot, but you get to the level of where Brad and I are at, or any tech who's been doing this a while. I could name 30 guys here. We're not buying 5 resistors. We're not buying some green wire. You know, we're spending $1,000 on stuff that most people in the world have never even heard of, but it makes life easier. Let's see here. Valbor Engineerings, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Cheers from the Netherlands. Thanks for being here. What are my thoughts on the Saldano SL100 chassis layout versus Fender or Marshall layout? I think the true SLO 100 is a brilliantly laid out amp, and I think Mike took a perverse joy in doing his heater wires in such a way to just to all the everything must be twisted guys, and it certainly works. You know, he has proven that careful lead dress trumps traditional heater dress arrangements in terms of going crazy. I hope you never have a Saldano on your bench where you have to rebuild the heater wiring because something a two arced or something, because it can be a pain in the butt to undo and redo the architecture in there. The rest of it, you know, they're really high quality PCBs, good amounts of copper. Everything, all the components are laid out very well. All the components have a suitable amount of space around them. They're not all jammed together as close and as small as possible, like on a Mesa or other noisy, bad sounding amps. There's a lot of space. Everything is at least rated for the current or wattage necessary. Overkill where he had the space. They sound great. They're built great. They last a long time. And I like that he pulled off some non-traditional stuff. Of course, he pulled off that non-traditional stuff long enough ago that now it's traditional. C'est la vie. Let's see. The past says, "Hi, Lyle. I took your advice, sold my Blues Junior, and got a 76 Vibro Champ for a practice amp. Love it, but I opened it up and found 3 F&T 22 caps in place of the 40-20-20 cap. Should I be worried?" No, you're fine. A Vibro Champ, in theory, should have had 20-20-20 from the factory. Some of them had 40-20-20s, depending on what was in stock that day when they're building them. In theory, the little 5Y3 rectifier tube in a Vibro Champ isn't really happy with that 40 microfarad section and should never have more than 30 microfarad on it. In reality, most Vibro Champs with a 40 microfarad first section have not killed the 5Y3. When I do one, I will often use 20 or 30 for the first stage, but I use 40 for the second stage, which reduces hum in that little single-ended amp without inducing any stress on the rectifier tube. But if you were to have 3 F&T 22s instead of a multi-section can cap, that's actually what most Vibro Champs had. B, it's a much higher quality capacitor than any multi-section can cap made in the last 30, 40 years. And C, if you wanted to add more capacitance to it, you can put another 20 microfarad, or I guess 22 microfarad in parallel with existing F&T. I would suggest doing it to the second one in series rather than the first, just to make your rectifier tube have an easier life. But I'm glad that you went from the Blues Junior to the 76 Vibro Champ, because the Vibro Champ's a much better amp. It's not as loud as the Blues Junior, but it sounds better, will last longer, and will only appreciate in value, and is extraordinarily less likely to catch on fire. Barry C. asks the question that I hear more than any other, I guess. I have 2 amps from 1994 that are all original. Should I get the caps changed just based on age? There are 2 answers to that, both of which are correct. The first answer is most likely it is time to preventatively do that maintenance, because they are 30 plus years old now. It's strange to me how long ago 1994 was, because it seems like a couple weeks ago. So if the amps have actual monetary value on the market or value to you, they will fail eventually. They are 10, 15 years past their expected lifetime at this point. So you could preemptively change them out and not risk the amps. The other answer to that is what you would have seen on that, was it a Princeton that I had? Yeah, I had a Princeton come in not long ago that had the original caps from 1960 something. And the owner had gotten it from his dad. His dad passed and he inherited it, and he brought it in for service, and it just got a new power cable, and I changed one other little thing on there. I don't even remember what. It still had the original multi-section can cap. It had not exploded. The amp was working fine. It was quiet. I told him, if you're going to keep it and play it, you might want to preemptively have it changed out, but it was safe to sell as it was. Conversely, this 66 Princeton right here is in because, if you saw last week's video, the filter can caps have begun to leak everywhere, and it sounds horrible. And the difference between an old amp working fine and an old amp having a big problem could be a matter of weeks. You never know. It could be years from now, it could be weeks from now, it could be minutes from now. So if you have the means, I would suggest having them changed out before there's a noticeable problem. And the other argument is that it's not like caps are fine, and then they're bad. Caps are fine, and they gradually decrease in their quality of the filtering that they provide, and then they begin to fail drastically. So you can't not dramatically. You can't expect it to go zzz, pew. It actually has a long period of decline. And say that right here is where it begin to fail. You may be here. It's still got a couple of years, but the difference between here and here is a huge amount of sonic benefit. So if you go back up to this point where everything was operating as designed, the amp may be transformed. You may say, "Oh my God, this sounds so much better than I remember than I remember ever hearing this," or "It sounds brand new again. I remember why I loved it again." You don't always notice when something is failing. Like, I just got new glasses, and I kind of knew that it was time for a new prescription. I knew that my distance vision wasn't as good as it had been. Things were getting a little bit blurry. I got these, and I'm like, "Oh my God, everything looks so great now." And it's literally can be that much of a difference. Again, I talk too much when I answer these questions. Sorry. Jonathan Shop says, or Shop, always fun to see it live. Thanks, man. You're easily entertained. What are some things to consider when deciding on a combo or head and speaker? Trying to figure out which Friedman JJ to go with. The main argument for a combo is one carry, one trip, you're done. If it's a combo that you can pick up. The main argument for a head is you can, if say, especially with like a 100-watt Marshall rig, it's much easier to say, all right, I've got the head, and that's one trip to the car, and a 2x12 is another trip to the car, and I can carry each of those things individually. But the whole 100-watt Marshall combo is just too heavy for a lot of people. The other argument for a head is, all right, I've got this little head, and for some gigs I use it with a 1x12, and other gigs I use with a 4x10, whatever. So it gives you some variety. Or you are someone who already owns a lot of cabinets. So if you want to try a new amp, you just buy the head because you have cabinets that you like already, and it saves you the money of buying the combo version, and it saves you yeah, it reduces the number of variables in what you hear. Like, hey, I love this thing with the Creamback 75s. All these Marshall style amps sound great through that. I got this new one to try. It did not sound great. I know it's not the speakers. I know it's not the cab. Beyond that, if you're looking for uh, help with your Friedman JJ, get in touch with Dave Friedman. He knows much more about the JJ than I do, and he's heard just about every guy playing different styles to it. He could probably steer you to the right one. He's a real nice guy. Send him an email. Tell him I told him to bug you. Tell him I told you to bug him. That's the sentence I meant. Hey, Christopher Butler. I am doing great. Thanks very much. Clyde Broadway, can I tell you what orange amps are worth investing in? I don't know much. The modern ones I don't consider investable. They're temporary amps. You probably get 10 years out of the modern models, I guess. Maybe more, but I would expect 5 to 10 years. But when it goes to the older oranges and matte amps, I've not seen many in Memphis. There aren't that many. You have to remember that a lot of the British amps, the high watts, the matte amps, the oranges, even the Marshalls, were not available in most American cities until the middle to late 70s. So a lot of the classic era stuff, unless you were flying to Europe and brought one back, which would have been hideously expensive, they just weren't here. So I see a lot more 70s Marshalls than I do 60s Marshalls. Orange amps, I pretty much just see 90s and later. Jimmy Joe Fine says, hi, Lyle. Was wondering what might be causing random popping noises in my blackface basement. We noticed when we took a break the other day, just a few weird pops while sitting, not in standby. I would have to know which model blackface basement. There are a lot of things that could be causing that. Most likely it's tubes. Most likely it's preamp tubes, especially if it's an AB165. Which has just an enormous amount of gain. Any tube starts to go south in one of those, it'll start to act up and be very audible. See if it's on both channels. If it's on both channels, it's going to be V2 or V4. If it's on one channel, if it's on the bass channel, it'll be V1. If it's only on the other channel, it'll be on V3. Beyond that, I'd have to have your amp in front of me to tell you. Josh, oh, there we are. Huh. Joshua Rugg says, I did all the mods you published for my own box custom classic AC30, and I'm wondering if there's a way to change the tones circuit to get rid of the harsh treble frequencies. A lot of people find ways to make AC30s sound bad. And it's a very easy one to make sound bad because it is an odd tone stack. And I have done videos on how to use the tone stack in them. But the number one thing is, doc, it hurts when I do this. Don't do that. So if it's too bright, turn it down, the treble down a little bit. And don't forget you have the cut control. Turn the cut up. It'll lower the output, the high frequencies in the output. That is part of what makes that amp have its particular wonderful sound. And part of it, which I don't think I've ever seen discussed before, is the fact that the tone stack can be set quite bright, which excites a lot of upper frequency harmonic. I mean, so you get a lot of treble emphasis going into the phase inverter. And then you're rolling off a lot of those treble frequencies before it goes to the output tubes through the cut circuit. So the end result is not going to have a ton of treble if you don't want it to, but there's an excitement added and which frequencies distort in which ways. So you can have them kind of working opposite each other from one perspective, but really to get the end result, that can be a fantastic thing. But you have to play around with that. But the amp with the mods that I put out there for people to do or to have done themselves are correcting certain flaws of the custom classic and improving it in subtle ways, but it's still very much an AC30 circuit. And if you set it to be painfully bright, it will oblige you. You can also get it to be quite a dark sounding amp. You can also get it anywhere in between. So spend some more time with it and make sure that your guitar isn't at fault. Sometimes pickups just suck. Andrew Gonzalez says, if you ever have time, please consider doing a video on the death cap in vintage amps, if I haven't already. I think I've covered that pretty well in a lot of videos on vintage amps. I don't know whether, I suppose from a clickbaity perspective, I could get a lot of views on, does your amp have a death cap or something like that? Maybe I will. It's a poorly understood concept, and it kind of irritates me when I see modern companies like, say, PVR 5150 include the ground polarity switch with a death cap in an amp which has a grounded power cable. And I'm sure that they would say the reason they did that is so if someone is plugged into their house and they don't have a grounded outlet, they can lower the noise. And if used properly, you could even get it so that you'd be as safe as possible where neutral is tied to chassis through that cap. Let's put it this way. In order for me to do a video on that and really feel comfortable publishing it, I'd have to look up any argument in the world for its existence and be ready to disprove it. And that might include some math. And not only am I inherently lazy, I rarely have time to do. I don't sit down and say, I'm going to do a video on this subject. So let me research that for a couple of weeks. I get an amp in, it comes in for service. I document it. I discuss the issues. The bulk of what I do is reactive to what my workload is like, rather than, oh, I need to do something on this. I'll try to work something in, but I want to make sure that if I put out something out there specifically on that subject, that it is bulletproof and backed up. And it's because I'll be arguing with a lot of internet mythology. And so I need to bring research and go thud on the table before I tackle that can of worms. In the meantime, trust me, they're bad news. Use a grounded power cable, use a grounded receptacle, make sure all your power is good. If it's not, don't plug in. If you go to a club, bring an outlet tester. If it fails the outlet tester check, don't play there. Tell all your musician friends, we don't play that club until they change the wiring because they need to take better care of musicians and respect us. Thud. Let's see. Pedro Romero says Sozo versus Mallory. Mallory's cost less. They sound the same. Mallory's have thinner lead diameters, so they're can be a little harder to get the leads pretty, but it's very possible. And Sozo's have a logo that looks kind of like what Jimmy Page had on his 4x12 cabinet a long time ago. And so people pay a lot of money for them. The sound is about the same with either one. And yeah, I've A/B blind tested this kind of thing. It's not me just throwing it out there because I wanted to know if, hey, does this cap sound better than this cap or than this cap? And I've done as much of a true A/B blind test as one person can do, involving looper pedals and rotary switch boxes where I just have everything labeled A through whatever, and I don't remember what A is, or someone else randomly turning it and say, hey, is that A or C? After I've convinced myself that I've A's this way and C's this way, and then, hey, am I on A or C? Now they're on Q, So there are certain capacitor materials which sound different than others. It depends on the voltage present, depends on the circuit and where in the circuit they're used. I have found for the most part that material makes the most difference in high frequency content. You're more likely to hear a difference between a ceramic, poly, or silver treble cap than you are in 100 nanofarad polyester, polypropylene caps in an output section, for instance. Let's see. So what are those 6 archetypal amp varieties? Drew Seller says. Well, there's Fender Tweed, and let's just call it that, even though there's so many different versions of Fender Tweed. Let's do 2 different Fender Tweeds. Let's do the Fender Tweed Cathode. That covers a lot of 50s amps. Fender Tweed with the long-tailed pair. That's Bassman 5E8, large twin JTM 45, and some of the immediate JTM 45 variants up to the JTM 50 Black Flag stuff. There's the aside from the harmonic trim, there's pretty much the 60s Fenders with and without reverb. And I would include the Princeton in that, even though it has a cathode. I wouldn't include the Champ or Vibro Champ in that, but let's stick to the 12 watt and up models. Then let's ignore the Bassman, the black panel Bassmans. They're atypical from everything else. There's the Vox AC30. Interesting, the JMI or AC15 with its pentode has a lot in common with a lot of late 40s and early 50s Gibsons, which also use pentodes. Very interestingly, there's a lot of crossover between those amps and the Tweed Deluxe sound as well. And then later you get into if you look at the schematic in terms of what the circuit is, the topology of it. Say a 72 Super Lead is the same amp pretty much as a JTM 45, but there are enough differences in the values used that the sound is different. So I'd say the from 69 on Marshalls to about 83 are one archetype. Then you get into this, I'd say the Saldano and its bad copies. The SLO 100 is an archetype of which the dual rectifiers and the 5150s and 6505s are poor imitations. You could say the high watt would be kind of an archetype in that it sounds in between a Fender and the world's biggest Vox. But not enough people have played them, and not enough people have heard them for that really to be archetypal. And then I would say, I don't know where we're at now. There's also solid state, and I would say specifically solid state metal amps. They have a certain thing. I don't care whether that's like an 88 crate or a Randall, and whether your Randall is the Def Leppard Randall or whether it's the Pantera Randall. Those are sounds that tube amps don't get. And whether you love it or hate it, that's fine. That's all subjective, but it is an archetype at this point. So I guess that covers the bases. In terms of desert island stuff, though, the first 4 or 5 on that list, everything up through the 69 through 83 Marshall will be the last archetype that I particularly love. And one of the things that I know I'm not getting to everyone's questions yet, and I saw I've got a top chat donation that I need to read and acknowledge and thank. I'll try to get to all that. But one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is, and kind of springboards off this question of what are archetypal sounds. We have all this digital technology now, and I'm everything from the HG Stomp all the way up to the say the Fractal, and everyone's using them to replicate to better, less or more success, the existing tube amp archetypes. And that's fine. But it's kind of running really fast to get back to where we already are, though, with tubes and the cost and availability and flexibility of a rig. I understand why you would want to say, here's my Fender sound, here's my Marshall sound, here's my Mesa sound, all in this black box. But no one seems to be saying, okay, well, what can we do to sculpt the signal that comes out when I pick this string with this little flap of plastic into something no one's heard before? Now, there are guys who are doing that. I think Tim from Porphyria, is it Porphyria? Porphyria is what King George III had. Sorry. Yeah. Polyphia. Those guys seem to be doing some things like that. And I'm sure there are others, but it just seems we have all this technical ability now, and people are trying to make all that sound like this, but what else can that do? Because, you take a little bit of plastic or your nail, or I don't care what you use. You can use a credit card, you can use a quarter, you can use a peso, and vibrates a steel string, and a pickup turns that into something that can go forward from there. I have no idea why this is cutting out so much. It's cutting out much more than it ever has before. What happens when I don't pay for a full streaming service? I'm just using the live thing that comes with it. 3 favorite vintage blackface designs. Well, all of the blackface reverb amps are the same, except for the Princeton. Princeton's the outlier. But of all the Fender amps made from 63 to 1980 that had reverb, it's just one with different output tubes, or number of output tubes, and different transformers. Now, that had some cool effects where the Vibrolux does not sound like the Deluxe, does not sound like the Super Reverb. And a lot of that is, say, Super Reverb versus Vibrolux. Well, it's pretty much the same amp, but the Vibrolux has got a 28-watt output transformer, so the transformer itself ends up saturating and get a lot lower headroom, even though potentially it was just as loud as the Bassman. Not the Bassman, the Super Reverb. So from my perspective of making sure that people's amps continue to work, I don't care whether it's a Princeton, a Deluxe Reverb, this is 66, 65, or a Super Reverb or a Twin. From my perspective, they're all equally reliable. They're all equally easy to service. They're all potentially fantastic. And then it doesn't matter which one I like the sound of best, because you don't have to like what I like as far as the subjective stuff goes. So if my favorite is the Vibro Verb and your favorite is the Tremolux, you're not wrong, and I'm not right, and vice versa. Any of them are great choices if they make the sound that you find interesting. That's the end of it. They're wonderful, wonderful toys, and I hope we all find our favorites. Thanks, Brad. I didn't know it cut out. Yeah, 2.2K cathode resistor on the 60s Fender reverb drivers. Thanks, man. So yeah, I'm always behind the chat when it comes to this. What are my favorite amps being sold today? See my amps under 500 and amps under $1,000 video, and I promise I am working on the amps under $2,000 video. It requires a lot of research and scripting. That's the one series where I do say I'm going to get this ahead. I've got to do a lot of work ahead of time. I'm about 90% done with the research and planning, and then it's time to go into production on the video. Those take a lot of time. I don't have any thoughts on the AC30S1 because I've not had one on the bench. As far as I know, it is using a quite good MOSFET in place of tube circuitry in places. My hopes is that it is doing it as well as it could, unlike what they're doing in the AC10, which uses MOSFETs but then they take a very good MOSFET circuit and they dump it down to a crazy low level so they can go through an op-amp buffer and reverb circuit, which only has a unipolar 5-volt supply. So the AC10C1 is garbage. The AC15C1 and the AC30C1 are fantastic. I'm hoping the AC30S1 saves money over the AC30 by using some MOSFET stuff, but doesn't do it in the stupid way that the AC10 did. The AC10 is also built horribly, just crappy, insulting waste of money the way those things are built. I'm hoping the AC30S1 is built better, but until I have one, I don't have an opinion on it. But for the most part, for most players, my recommendations can be found in those videos. Thank you, Richard Weza in Seattle. John Cohen says, "Hey, Lyle, thanks again for the chats. I have a 20-watt Marshall, the L84 one. That's quite a few different models, but they're all built pretty much the same. There are taps for 240 volts and 230 volts. My mains is a fairly consistent 235 volts. Which one would be preferable over the other?" Now, I'm going to say that Brad, who has more experience with 240 volt operation, may be the better person to ask because he's in Australia. But in general, I think I would be correct in saying if you have a 240 volt and a 230 volt tap and your wall voltage is 235, set the amp to 240 because Marshall is going to be running the damn EL84s way too hot to begin with. So if all the voltages drop in comparison to the wall, that will be to your benefit. And if your wall voltage were to increase, say it normally runs at 235, but it spikes to 240, you're spiking up to where the amp is expecting it to be anyway. Whereas if you set it 230, it's already running a little bit over than that, then it can go much over that. I know that Brad said that his 240 volt supply often exceeds 250. So I would say in your situation, the 240 volt setting is the safer, but stay tuned to see if it corrects that or has more information. Hey, Scott Brockway, what silicone do I use for power caps? I use silicone. I always forget silicone. So Silicon Valley, silicone in the valley. Pardon me. Sorry. I can't help myself. I'm 12. I use non-reactive. I don't remember the code for it. I buy it at tubedepot.com. I've seen the same stuff for sale at AutoZone and other places. Or you can buy it sold as aquarium safe. RTV, I think that's what the initials are. I'm terrible remembering things like that. But yeah, I use that stuff because I know it's not going to affect the plastic of anything I attach with it. It doesn't have any acidity, doesn't corrode anything. Yeah, the cathode driver resistor, the 2.2K Boyd, half watt is usually fine. You can use a 1 watt if you want. Half watt is what has been in just about every 60s Fender, and they tend to hold up really well. I'm going to get to one more question from Rafaiote or Rafaiote. Put it in the comments how you prefer to have that pronounced. I hate guessing at name pronunciations. I want to get everyone's name correct. We get to your question, then I'm going to scroll down real fast and find the super chats. Then we're going to take a little intermission, and then we're going to come back to right after Rafaiote's question. But he asked my thoughts on PEC pots and what Nishikon filter caps am I using in my build and repairs. I'm not using Nishikon axials anymore. They don't make axials anymore. I only use radials. I use various series of Nishikon radials. I'm looking for 105 degree rating or 125 degree rating. I'm looking for at least 5,000 hours. I try to get 10 or 12,000 hours. I'm usually able to get 10 or 12,000 hour rated 105 degree caps of suitable diameter and lead spacing. You can use Panasonic. You can use Rubicon. You can use United Chemcon. I like Nishikon. Pretty much and it sounds lame. All the cons are good. They're Japanese brands, and Panasonic is great as well. My thoughts on PEC pots. In theory, they're great. I have used them. They're hideously expensive, from $9 to $30 per pot. They don't give any performative benefit over an alpha or CTS. The tapers aren't always what are optimal for certain Fender style amps. And the main reason I don't use them, besides the fact that they're hideously expensive for what you get, is the premise of them is that it's conductive plastic inside a stainless steel case and will never get dirty, never need to be cleaned. In reality, they get scratchy like anything else, and they need to be cleaned like anything else, and they're a pain in the ass to open up and clean, unlike a CTS or Alpha, which has a little tab opening, or you can just go down right on the wafer itself. So I have stopped using PECs unless there's some spot in an amp where I actually need a 2-watt potentiometer, which is rare. That said, I'm doing no one else asked me for one. I'm not doing another one. I'm doing a Dumble style build for a friend of mine, and that one's using all PECs because he wanted all the PECs. So you'll see that in the coming weeks. Let me scroll down so I don't miss the super chats. Then we'll come back up to Raphael's area, and then we will resume after intermission. Wow, there are a lot of questions here. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get to all of them, but I will try. Michael Buncher, thank you very much. Planning to put a WGS 10-inch G10CS in a black panel Princeton Mojo. He's second guessing himself and thinking of building his own cab with a 12-inch. 12-inch versus 10-inch in a Princeton. You don't need to build a separate cab. You can get a Mojo Tone panel with a 12-inch opening and the right grill cloth for like $65. So you could have a 10-inch baffle and a 12-inch baffle and just change out 4 screws and go back and forth if you wanted to. In my experience, a good 10-inch speaker, such as that G10C, you're not going to miss the lowest of the lows compared to a 12. A 12 does have more low end than a 10, but not always in a Princeton cabinet. A Princeton cabinet is small, has an open back. Just because the speaker can reproduce a low frequency does not mean that it will in a physical space. And how speakers work and the low end response of a speaker and how these interact, it's a very long subject. You may hear a slight increase in low end if you use a 10-inch versus 12-inch version of the same speaker in a Princeton. If you use a 10-inch, which has really good low end like that G10C, versus a 12-inch, which can be a little tubby, say like a G12H, I mean, a little shy on the bass, like I'd say a G12H30, you may hear a lot more low end out of the 10-inch. In general, I think if you have a Princeton with a 10-inch speaker has been great for so many thousands of fantastic musicians. If you have a problem with the sound at that point, it may not be the speaker. And I don't mean that as any kind of attack on you. So plus you can always get a 1x12 cab. And then you say, hey, for most gigs, I just use this with a little 10-inch speaker, 8 ohms. And then for larger gigs, I've got a 12-inch 1x12 I bring with it. And I'm running both at once at 4 ohms, and life is great. And I can mic either one, and I've got tons of low end, and it's as loud as a deluxe reverb when I use both. Any more super chats before we take a break? Hey, Leonardo rules. Ooh, yeah. Are the 64 hand-wired custom deluxe Princeton amps built well? No, they are not. You are paying for a whole lot of nothing if you buy one of those, and it is a shame and a sin. They're hand-wired, but the hand wiring is crappy. The wire is thick spaghetti shit. The PCBs are, it's not a Fender eyelet board like in these Fenders. It's a PCB disguised as an eyelet board. The blue caps that are supposed to be Ajax tributes are just cheap caps in a plastic casing, which kind of, if you squint, looks like a blue Ajax. They don't sound like one. And because they didn't want to deal with trying to sell the Roach, which is a LDR and a neon bulb in a little plastic case. In Europe, because it's not ROHS certified, rather than find an expensive workaround for that, they just put a cathode bias in that amp, the same bias wiggle, the same way you'd find it at Princeton. And so it's not a 64 tribute because it has a different vibrato circuit than the actual 64 deluxe reverb. The hands that wired it don't know what they're doing. It's a bad PCB design with insulting marketing choices that you pay an extra $1,000 for, and for that price, what, 2,500. There's a number of better built amps out there. If you want something truly hand built, I would look at maybe what Milkman offers. And at the same, or the Sir, you could get a Sir Bella, which smokes it. Smokes it. You would never look at that Fender again if you played the Sir Bella. Or if you don't need the reverb, or you could get the Sir Ombre, which kills it so much better. Or you can get the standard 65 reissue. You can get them used for $800, $900, sometimes less, and have a tech do the stuff that I put out there on easy ways to upgrade your 65 reissue. Spend $300 on it, 500 if it needs all new tubes, and be well ahead of the game. I'd much rather have a 65 reissue with $150 worth of work on it and maybe a new speaker than know that I got played for a sucker by Fender's marketing. I know that sounds harsh and all that, but that's just reality. It's a bad amp at that price. Doesn't mean it's a bad amp. It's a bad amp for what they charge for it. And we're going to take about a 5-minute break. We'll be back. And we're back. Let's see. Where? A gift. I didn't buy it myself. The glass, that is. I bought the beer myself. Cheers, everyone. Cheers. One of the advantages of being self-employed. Let's see. I'll scroll down. I'll get back up. Two quick little shout outs here. 74 Canal says, Bonsoir from Remedy, France. I will be in Paris 1 week from today. So think of me when I'm down there or up there. I'm not sure where Rumorly is. And Mr. Ailtube, watch of the day, wearing the G-Shock Cassie Oak, the GM 2100. I love this watch. It is one of my two favorites. It is just cool as hell. It does so many cool things, but I can just look at it and say, hey, it's 11 after 3. Actually, in preparation for next week, I've got all my digital watches set to 24-hour time. So I'm trying to train myself to say it's 15:03, etc. Let me scroll back up to where we were. All right. Yeah, Brad's got a super reverb at the moment. All 4 speakers are shot. It's all too common. That's what happens when you have 20-watt speakers in an amp like that. One speaker goes out, and then the other speakers have more wattage than they want, and then another speaker goes out, and then all of a sudden it's a chain reaction. Nick Sarah says he would love to see me do a video running through a simple Fender schematic for us starting getting into the amp world. Thanks for all you do. Thank you very much, Nick. I appreciate that. I think that Uncle Doug has got that covered very well, and Rob Robinette has covered that a lot on his own site. I might do something along those lines. I think if you were to look back at some of my videos where I talk about the design, a lot of what applies to a Fender applies to other amps as well. If you were to go back and look at the video I did on the one-wire mod Marshall, I think I whistled, Marshall Randy Rhodes, for instance. But maybe I'll do that in the future. It's an interesting circuit. I certainly wouldn't need to reference anything to draw one out. I could just draw it out live in front of you guys from memory. I'm not bragging. It's just, if you do something a couple thousand times, you damn well ought to learn how to do it. Thanks, Ike Stoddard. Appreciate that. His now stolen twin reverb was bought new in 1972. Ouch. It was setup guy said it was 100 plus watts RMS into his power load. What circuit was that? No master volume. I don't remember which model number the 72 twin would be. Sorry. After AB 763, I've got to look up. There are a lot of transitional models between 69 and 74-ish where things were changed. But yeah, twin reverb is nominally 85 watts. AB 763 is nominally 85 watts measured clean. And then the later ultralinear ones were 130 watts measured clean. But if you're running it past the point where it's clean, it can get quite a bit louder than that. So I'm sorry I don't remember the exact model number, but a 72 twin circuit, most of the changes compared to the AB 763 would just be in the phase inverter and output section. They're not major, but as you've discovered, they're fairly significant. Natasha Satana says, thanks for the great info. I have 2 original CTS speakers here that were in the amp. Where can I have them reconed? I would recommend Dave Halford at halfordloudspeakers.com, HALFORD. Dave does impeccable work. He's the guy that I use for reconing. He's here in town in Memphis. If I don't know where you live, there aren't a lot of great Reconers still going. I know if you're up in the Northeast, Ventone is a great choice. I'm not sure where else. Um, it is kind of a dying art. But Dave Halford would be a great choice, and you can ship them to him. And the nice thing about CTS 10-inch Alnicos is that they don't weigh that much, so the shipping is not tremendously expensive. Thanks, Robert Easterday. And Angry Shoebox, I'm glad that I was able to help you de-hum your Blues Junior. Alex Marik says, have you managed to check the troubleshoot video from Mesa Boogie TA-30? Would appreciate some insight. Have you posted a video in one of the comments on one of my videos that you have troubleshooting a TA-30? I'm sorry, I have not. I've been so busy this week. You notice there hasn't been a video in a couple days. I'm making the time for this because I can't make noise with these because my wife is doing academic Zoom calls all day. So we must keep her pleased. And I'm like, well, I can't really get any work done this afternoon. I'll have a beer with my buds. So thanks for being here, because otherwise I'd be drinking alone and as sad as George Thorogood. Hi from Budapest, SL Amps. Hey, SL Amps. I really, really enjoyed working on that Dumble steel string swinger, whichever he called it, homage that you did. And I'm sorry that it had that problem with that fiery capacitor. I don't know there's any way you could have predicted that. I hope that you saw those videos and can make that change going forward. But other than that, your amp was just beautifully done and a joy to work on. And after a relatively simple repair, I mean, it looked scary with the smoke, but it was a simple repair. It sounded phenomenal. Just really one of the better sounding amps I've had in. Way too loud for most mere mortals to use, but that's part of the whole appeal, isn't it? So well done. And thanks for joining us here, all the way from Budapest. I will be in Vienna in a week and a half, and I'm going to be trying some Hungarian food, authentic, hopefully. We don't get a lot of authentic Hungarian food here in Memphis, but I'm going to be trying some. Carl Carsnark says, any experience with a BK Butler tube driver amps? I've never played their amps. I've had the pedals. I've never played their amps or seen inside one, so sorry, no. Clyde Broadway asks, any current production Fenders that don't need to be worked on? Yeah, some of the Champ XDs, because when they die, you just throw them away. There's no real fix for those. No, I don't. I can't think of any current production Fender that I would buy and then send out on a world tour. Not to name drop, but I'm about to name drop. When Elvis Costello was in town 6 months ago, and I did a bunch of amps for his bassist, and I did 2 amps for his. I did two SVTs for his bassist. I did 2 what are they called? Magnetones for Charlie Sexton, his guitarist, and I did. I opened 3 of Elvis's amps. I just verified that his old Tweed Deluxe was fine, needed nothing. And I opened up his 2 65 Reissue Deluxe reverbs on the floor of the studio while they're taking a break. No pressure. They're about to resume rehearsals, and Elvis Costello is standing over there talking to the engineer or whoever. And so, a speed round of amp repair, I opened them back up, and all the solder joints on the input jacks and the volume pots were broken, which is really common with the 65 Reissue. So really fast, I reflowed all the solder joints on those, took the knobs off, made sure all the hardware was tight, not all the nuts were tight on the pot. That's the number one reason that those solder joints break. So retightened all the hardware on the jacks and pots, put all the knobs back. Everything was resoldered, and told their tech that next time they were in town, they needed to bring them back to me, or as soon as they got to another big city where they're going to be for a period of days, call a tech in that city and plan ahead, because those amps needed to have the heater wires moved from the board to the sockets so that they would be roadworthy for the rest of their tour, because they're about to start a world tour. And anyway, I made those two amps work and not crackle anymore, so everyone was happy, and it did not interrupt Elvis's afternoon. So my job was accomplished. But yeah, I mean, even at that level, people don't always know that they're not really ready for prime time. And it was a great honor to work on anything Elvis Costello touched or used. And yeah, I did get to see the Jazz Master, though I did not ask to pick it up and play it. I didn't quite have the balls for that day. I figured it'd be a quick way to get fired. Thoughts on 6040 versus 6337 solder? Yeah, Mike. 6337 is nominally better, but it is harder to get clean results with, and I found that it led to excessive solder spatter. And as the end results, in my experience with 6040, are great, and there was less solder spatter, or not solder spatter, sorry, flux spatter to clean up, I went back to 6040. I get great results. I don't have to do as much cleanup behind myself. I've never heard of, let alone worked on, a Vam Power amp. Richard Weza, sorry. Paul Woodvikowski says, I love your channel. Thank you very much. He bought a AC15C on my recommendation. What amp would I recommend in current production amps to get a Fender clean tone? It's going to depend on your price range. If you see my amps under $1,000 video, you can find that for under $1,000, you can actually get, say, a 76 through 79 Super Reverb or Twin. And you're not going to find a better Fender clean tone than those amps, but they are very large. They're very heavy, and by this point, they do need usually $200 to $400 worth of work to get them back up peak performance. But at the end of that, you've got $1,200 into an amp, where if you were to build the same amp, if you were to ask Brad or myself to build you that amp, we're looking at $1,500 just in parts. If that is too much amp for you, I don't know what your budget is. I would say, again, the 65 Deluxe Reissue is a fantastic amp if you budget another $200 to $300 worth of work just to have them made reliable. Beyond that, I would look at the Cerbella. I don't know what your budget is, though. Producer Man, how are the 77 to 78 Pro reverbs? I've heard they're too clean. I just restored one a couple weeks ago. I think it's on the channel. I kept it ultra linear. I kept it really clean. They're fantastic amps. They're not too clean. They are very clean, but any super reverb, traditional super reverb, is a very loud amp. And in order to get it to play at breakup, there are very few stages these days where you can do that. So I don't think that they're too clean, because the natural breakup of a Pro Reverb happens at mega high volumes anyway. I will say that what people are saying about them being too clean comes down to two and a half things. Let's do the half thing first. The taper of the volume and treble pots in the late 70s is not the same as the taper as the volume treble and bass pots is not the same as the taper of the volume treble and bass pots in the 60s. So they tend to have kind of woofy lows from the bass, and the treble, to get the same response out of the treble that you would in, say, 65, you have to turn it up to like 7 or 8, because they're using a 10% taper versus a 30% taper. Same thing for the volume pot, in that you have to turn it up more to get to the same output level as the previous amps. So if you compare say a 66 Pro Reverb that's on 4 with a 78 Pro Reverb that's on 4, while the output is about the same for both amps, the 78 will sound much cleaner. That's because the preamp level of the 78 is much lower at 4 than it is on the 66, but the output wattage has been increased. So you have a cleaner signal amplified more versus a louder, dirtier signal amplified less. You end up at the same place. The 66 has got breakup. The 78, you have to turn that same amp volume up higher to get to the same preamp behavior. That's just the taper of the pot. The other two factors in any mid 70s Fender are that they decrease the grid leaks on the input of the phase inverter from 1 meg to 330K. They increased the input capacitor from 1 nanofarad to 10 nanofarad. And that was a mistake, which makes the whole thing too bassy. They decreased the resistors by a power of 3. They should have increased the capacitor by a factor of 3, not a factor of 10. They should have gone to a 3.3 nanofarad versus a 10 nanofarad. So any of those 70s Fenders I get in where there's a 330K resistor, I keep the 330K resistor. That's fine. That's good. I change that 10 nanofarad to a 3.3 nanofarad, and then the bass response becomes that of the 60s Fenders. By the way, take notes on this stuff if you want to work on amps or you love this stuff. I don't know of many channels that are going to give you this stuff, and there's always a voice in the back of my mind saying, "Don't tell them everything. These should be secrets." But this is just real basic high pass frequency stuff. This is RC filter calculation stuff that I'm not the only person who knows, but I'll share it with you. So that's one of the things. The other aspect is the late 70s Fenders with master volumes have a bright cap on the master volume. So as you turn the master volume down even a little bit, the whole thing gets brighter. It sounds awful. If you're either snip out that cap or just lift one end up, desolder one end and leave it free floating, it can be reconnected for resale. The master volume sounds natural at all volume ranges on that amp without that bright cap. You don't lose high end without that bright cap, but that bright cap adds so much high end as you turn it down, then it becomes a very clean, painful amp. So those are the factors that make people think that model is too clean, quote. And remember, people wanted cleaner, louder amps in the 70s because they were playing bigger stages. PA systems had not caught up yet. And that was your clean amp, and next to your 50-watt Marshall on a 4x12, that was your dirty sound. So that clean amp had to be as loud as your dirty sound, so the people in the 40th row could hear you. Let's see. Andy C says, "Hi, Lyle. I watched your $500 and $1,000 amp videos. Do I have any 5-watt amp recommendations?" I do, and I would put them into 3 categories. There are the very nice, relatively expensive 5-watt amps, say the Swart Atomic Space Tone that I reviewed. Phenomenal amp, 5 watts, 5-6 watts, whatever. And then similarly, the Sir Corso that I did a couple weeks ago, a month or so ago. Phenomenal. Not very much output, also in that same 5 to 10 watt range. Second of all, there's the Champ and the Vibro Champ, which are time-tested, wonderful sounding amps, as long as you know what you're getting. I would say you could consider the Vibro Champ Reverb, the new one. It's not really the same thing. They've really overcomplicated it, and the reverb to me doesn't sound that right. But it's worth looking at if it floats your boat. But trouble is, even a 70s Vibro Champ costs more today than it should because the market's crazy. Third of all is any suitable practice amp that has a master volume. So depending on the price point, if your price point is $350, get a Boss Katana 50 watt and to keep the master volume low for home use. If your budget is higher, get an AC-15, keep the master volume down. Get a Princeton, don't turn it up above 2.5. So for most players who don't have the money to invest in a lot of different amps, I would say get one amp that you can use quietly as well, but still use on stages. And I've shown that in Deluxe Reverb, Princeton Reverb, AC-15 C1 videos where, hey, this thing is still useful as a practice amp, a bedroom amp. You're using your bedroom wrong. But for those who really want to have an esoteric collection, like they've got their 17 amplifiers, and here's the one that they take upstairs with them to their home office. I don't know if it gets better than the Sir Corso or the Swart Atomic Space Tone, unless you were to pick up a really sweet, great condition 66 Vibro Champ. And that is also a phenomenal sounding amp. But just know that if you get an old Vibro Champ, it's really hard to get a speaker that sounds good in those. There's a cabinet depth and hitting the transformers and capacitor issue. You can't really upgrade the speaker in those small amps, but sometimes they hit the sweet spot. Brad shared a free PDF regarding bypass caps, which I don't have time to click on right now, but I trust Brad implicitly. If you guys don't know Brad's Guitar Garage, as soon as this live stream is over, go to Brad's channel. He's really funny. He knows a thing or two, and he's one of the few techs whose videos I can watch and not say, "Oh, he missed that," or "He should have done this or that." I never second guess him. If I broke both my arms and I had to have my amp fixed, if I could send it to Sydney, I'd have Brad fix it. So, thanks, Farmer David. Say hey to Farmer Ted for me. ADV, cheers from Northern California. Knowledge gained from you allowed me to fix the smoking 77 twin and recap my refrigerator. Big thanks. Well, I try to put a lot of appliance repairmen out of work, and I've been doing my share of appliance repair and installation this past couple of weeks. So congratulations, man. Thank you. Buzz Crumhunger. Wow, what a great name. Crumhunger. Is that a 10-inch pile driver in that Princeton Reverb behind you? I don't know what that is. I don't recognize that speaker. I'm going to take it out at some point and check it. I see the dome just like everyone else. It doesn't have any logo on the back. I don't know what the codes mean. I need to look all that up. So when the parts come in to finish the restoration on this Princeton, I'm going to see what that speaker is. And then we'll see how it sounds. Hear how it sounds. Let's see. Jason Hobbs says, "Hey, Lyle, my amp tech is Chuck Frank from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Great tech. He speaks very highly of you." Well, thanks, Jason. And thank you, Chuck, if you see this. It's always good to be thought highly of. Um, I don't know if you're on here, Chuck. If you are, I'll look for you. If not, thank you very much. And I'm glad to be of help to people. Afternoon Graphite and Cigars. Boyd Timothy says, "I've now built 4 tube amps from scratch. I'm about to start on my 5th. I don't actually need them all. Recommendations on selling, donating, liability concerns. Obviously not going to make money." I don't know. Depends on where you live, but before you sell them to anyone, or even give them to anyone who's not a personal friend or family member, maybe if you know any amp techs in your area, ask them to either look through detailed photos that you send them, or to look at the amp in front of them. Make sure at the very least that the whole thing is wired to safety codes and that there's no shock hazard to anyone, because the last thing you want to do is sell it to some guy for $100 And then something happens, and then you have someone's estate coming after you, and hopefully you did everything right and everything's cool. If a budding builder in Memphis were to come to me with that same question and say, "Hey, I've got these two amps I built. I want to sell them because I don't have the space. I like building them. I've got some friends who are interested." I'd say, "Yeah, drop them off. I'll look at them over the next week or so, and I'll at least say whether they're safe or whether there's anything you could do to make them that way." I'd work, and send me a pizza. Buy me dinner. I'm a cheap date. Thanks, John Capoletti. Sorry, I can read very well, but I need to move it much closer to me. These are my distance glasses, and for things that are close, I'll look over the glasses, and everything about arm's length right here is just the worst possible zone. So I can see the stuff that's 10 feet away, and I can see the stuff that's a foot away. Anyway, I have the opposite problem if I have my contacts in, then I can see everything distant gray. I have to go where my readers make everything with an arm reach just gray, and then everything about 6 to 8 feet away from me is in an in-between zone. Uh, I'm looking into progressive lenses, but I think as thick as as heavy as my prescription is, I'd have big bands of distortion that would give me headaches and drive me nuts. Jimbo says, "Can you imagine what that new Mesa Mark VII must look like inside?" Well, it can only be a step up from the Mark V. What happened to the Mark VI? But I will I will reserve judgment on the new Mesa Gibson offerings until I can see one. It's got to be a step up, right? They can't get worse, can they? Hey, Tube Workshop, and your name is Mario. So welcome back, Mario. Sorry. See, I try to remember all these things. On my mind, I'm like, all right, Tube Workshop. He's in Germany. He's got that cool master volume circuit, and he's German, and his name is Mario. That makes sense. Total sense. Yeah, I would not go to Amazon or eBay for resistors or anything like that. Go to a vendor. I mean, at Tube Depot, I think if you buy more than 10 um, Zycon half watt carbon films, they're like 5 cents each. And if you buy more than 100, they're like a penny each. You know, figure out the values that you're going to need, buy at least 10 of each, and you're going to save tons of money over Amazon, places like that. And if you're going to order serious quantities, spend 3 days figuring out how Mauser or DigiKey's sorting service works and learning, learning how to read data sheets. So you can pick out a resistor for yourself. So you can say, all right, here's this Yageo or whatever it's pronounced, half watt carbon film. Here's this Koa Spear half watt carbon film. Here's this Zycon half watt carbon film. Oh, wait, the Zycon, I can only order minimum quantities of 1,000. But if I could order minimum quantities of 1,000, they'd be 0.03 cents each. That's why I can get them so cheap, the same thing so cheap from Tube Depot, because they're ordering 1,000 of them. But I can't, I want to go, I'm gonna go through here. So, all right, I'm going to pay only 4 cents each if I order 100, or I can pay 40 cents for one. Well, what do you think you're going to do? So never buy clones of switchcraft jacks. Make sure it says switchcraft, and I have seen fake switchcraft jacks out there. I've not gotten any from my vendors, but I've seen horror stories from other techs. So I'm kind of reacting to things as I go. Um, I'm looking through here. I Hey, Rob F. I don't have any thoughts on Fat Jimmy amps. I think Fat Jimmy might be a friend of mine. Is he the same guy who does the speakers? I say friend, an online acquaintance. Is he the same guy who does, is it Fat Jimmy speakers that are the custom line of speakers? Brad knows what I'm talking about, where he has warehouse make them for him to his spec. So if it's the same guy making the amps who makes the speakers, they're probably great, but I don't have any direct experience of them. Chris Bushnell says, do you have any impressions about the PRS HDRX20? I only have that impressions in that someone sent me an email showing me photos of the inside. And the photos of the inside of that model look so much better than the other PRS amps I've been in. The Archon, the 2-channel C, the 2-channel H, those are all absolute trash. And I've been in the DGT, the David Grissom one, which is really well done. And I've been in a couple of the very high-end early ones, like the one that was a clone of what Dwayne used at Fillmore or whatever. That was really well done. But aside from the DGT and some of the highest end stuff, all the other PRS amps I've been inside have been garbage, with 148s instead of 1 in 4007s, and the little fake eyelets on the PCB, which is a fake eyelet board, really thin traces that lift if you look at them sideways. Not been impressed at all. And weird routing where this thing is connected to here and it passes by 18 other things to get to there and picks up all kind of noise and your modulation. Not been impressed at all. But from what I have seen of the new model, it looks really well laid out and really well built for the price. But I have not had one in for review yet. And I don't get things in for review. I get them in to fix. And given that all the ones in existence right now should still be under the 1 or 2 year warranty, it'll probably be a while before I get one. But I'm interested to. Colin Demo. Sorry, I almost said Colin Demp, but that's the eyesight thing. Hi there. Did you have a chance to check out the Celestion Neo Creamback in that 68 Princeton? If so, what's your thoughts yet? Thanks. Not yet. That 68 Princeton is right there, and I spoke to the owner on it, and I'll give you guys a spoiler for an upcoming video. He wanted me to make it into the amp he thought he was buying, because we talked for about 20 minutes about amps on the market and his price. And he just really wanted a 30 to 40 watt, 1-channel clean amp with tremolo and reverb and a 1x12. And unless you pay about twice as much more, that's just not really out there. So I'm going to change the filter caps. I'm going to change those two bad JJ 606s for some TADs and bias it correctly. And I'm going to pull the board and figure out what they did that makes this thing a custom 68, probably undo a lot of that. And he's going to get back essentially just the reverb tremolo channel of an AB763 into a 2x6L6 output stage. And the wattage will be much set by the voltages in the output transformer. So given the size of the output transformer, it's not going to be as loud as a real pro. I expect this thing is going to be, in between a Vibrolux and a Pro as far as the output. But it's, quite a bit louder than a deluxe reverb, with quite a bit more headroom for his purposes. So stay tuned for that. At which point this little Neo will get quite the workout, and I'm going to try some other things into it as well. And in fact, I've got this 65 deluxe here. The owner is coming by tomorrow. He's going to do a little playing demo of it, and I might have him play the 65 deluxe through that little Neo Creamback, and just to see what the ET65 and this sounds like versus the Creamback Neo. So might be interesting. Matt Pruitt says, I've used a Mesa Lone Star for years. It's one of the very few models that I think sounds good. That's honest, but it's it's subjective, but it's a subjective opinion formed after playing almost every common amp in the world that's been made for the last 40 years. I don't mean that to be egotistical. It's just, you do this long enough, you build up some experience. And I think the Mesa Lone Star is one of the very few Mesas that I could ever use myself. It's a good clean amp that also does some acceptable mid to higher gain stuff. You've mentioned that Mesas can be problematic, more than problematic, but the Mesa Lone Star is one of the better ones out there. What should I do to mine to make it reliable? See, that's the trouble. You can't really make it reliable. The things that are going to fail on a Lone Star are the pots. Mesa uses cheap pots. They eventually will fail. All the jacks on the output board, every Lone Star I've seen has used gold-plated jacks. They all corrode. And once they begin to corrode, you don't have a good speaker connection. Your effects loop connection normally stops and you get noise. And then they're just general Mesa issues. But the things you can do to try to make that not happen, maybe once a year, take all your knobs off, make sure all the pot hardware is tight. Maybe every 3 or 4 months, make sure all your jacks on the front panel are tight. Make pretty much the same time, make sure all the nuts on your rear panel jacks are tight. Maybe if you have the ability to, open it up once a year and spray some deoxit on all those jack contacts on the rear panel while inserting and removing a plug. In the meantime, any jack on the rear of your Lone Star that you don't use, go to the hardware store, get those little 1/4-inch plastic hole plugs. They'll cover the hole. They won't open the normaling or anything, but they'll cover the jack hole to the point where dust and dirt won't get in there, and that can really help with the Lone Star. Beyond that, keep your fingers crossed. And while it's a good sounding amp, it is not, I don't think, a great sounding amp. If it's still working now, it has a high resale value. While maintaining it, you might want to look at other amps out there. You might find something that is more reliable long term, though yours has worked for you for years. I can't ignore that, but it's one of the better models of a bad bunch. It might be good for you to move on from it before it begins to develop big issues. But hey, if you love it, you love it. More power to you. I've said what you can do. Let's see. Studio 5 says, hey there, Lyle. I was scrolling through the questions and I saw someone mention tube shortages. Is this still a thing? And what tubes do we now avoid? Love your channel. Thank you, man. Now own an AC-15 because of it. Hope you enjoy it. Yeah, the tube shortage is not nearly as bad now as it was a year and a half ago, but it is still a very much real thing. Between the Russian embargo, there's not a lot of new sensor stuff on the market. So there's not Mullards, not a lot of Sovtech, not a lot of various brands, Electro-Harmonics. What there is still out here is stuff that might have been the B stock or the dregs from a few years ago, until this whole situation in Ukraine was resolved, hopefully in Ukraine in Sanity's favor. I don't see the Russian embargo going away for anytime soon. I'm afraid that new sensor will when they do come back on the market, will try to keep prices high. Schwagang factory had a bad fire. They're still not in production. JJ, the Slovakian, not Slovakian, sorry. Or is it Slovakian? Anyway, JJ, always get that region of the world mixed up. I think they're Slovakian. They've been having a lot of they had a lot of problems with COVID in their factory and production, and they got way behind on orders. But they've really been having a problem with the glass being too thin and tubes breaking. If you look at them, tubes losing vacuum. It's been really hard for me and other techs I know to use and recommend JJs for a while because they just have so many premature, unexplainable failures. So we're really left with tube amp doctor right now, in my experience, and it seems to be that of other techs. Tube amp doctor and Pisvane. Now, Pisvane is the new Chinese factory, and so you have this factory making tubes, some of which are sold as Pisvane, some of which are sorted and sold as tube amp doctor, and some of which are sorted to a higher standard and sold as tube amp doctor red base. When possible, I try to get the ones that are sold as tube amp doctor red base. They're all Chinese tubes, but they are sorted with a higher QC process and a company that stands behind them. That seems to be the best option on the market right now. That could change next week. I would love to get back to where there are all kinds of tubes on the market. I personally miss being able to order the military spec 7189 EL84s from the tube store, but those are a Russian surplus tube, and you can't get them now. If they have them on their site now, they were like $30 a tube, then they went to over $100 a tube. Before this entire thing started, I could get a really nice Chinese sorted, the tube store branded tube for about, your price would have been about $30 a tube. My price was about $12 a tube, though I pass it on to my clients. And then those things went to $45 and $50 a tube. And like, can't play that game. So we're not out of the woods, but it's a lot better than it was. Let's see. I don't have any opinion on a Randall Diavolo. Sorry. What do you think about the SVT CL from Ampeg? Are the new VRs and 50th anniversary worth almost $3K? Man, that's a long subject, but I'll give you the short answer. The SVT CL, the VRs, and the anniversary heritage are all built the same. They're all built the same. That board on the board that holds all the preamp tubes and the output tube board, it's all the same stuff, built exactly the same way with the same problems. They're going to have broken solder joints. They're going to have problems with the screen grid resistors overheating. They're going to have a myriad of problems, but they're all fixable. The bias protection circuits kind of act up from time to time. I would not let that stop you from buying one versus the other. I would say this: if you're going to play that very expensive SVT game, I think the Heritage would almost win. The trouble is the Heritage, they run the standby switch in such a way that the mains AC is brought very near to something in the preamp, and the examples that I've had had a bad buzz, and the only way to fix that would be to leave a dummy standby switch on the front panel and either not use standby because it's really not necessary due to the way a power relay works in that model, or put a new standby switch on the back of the amp. So the best sounding version out of those has a bad buzz due to the way the wires are routed. And I think the VR is done the same way. The CL doesn't have that issue, but the CL preamp doesn't sound as good as the Heritage preamp. The Heritage has the preamp circuit, which sounds the most like an actual 69 or 76 SVT. All that said, why the hell does anyone who's not rich think they need an SVT? It's fine if you're Adam Clayton. Have 10 of the fuckers. But, you're going to need 10 to have one that's working at all times. The guy, I don't remember his name, real nice guy, great bassist, playing with Elvis Costello. He had 2. They were both beat up. They had both been serviced hundreds of times in various cities across the world because they were CLs, and CLs fail. And they fail all the time, and there's nothing a tech can do. Doesn't matter if it's me. It doesn't matter if it's the. I'm not going to name other techs because it may seem like a criticism. It could be the best amp tech ever. And I'm not saying I'm there. They couldn't keep that thing ready to tour the world. So he had two of these things and he, they're touring with Elvis Costello. It's not like they're just going to some little shop in the back, a little room in the back of a music store. They're seeking out great techs all over the world. These amps keep failing on them. That makes no sense to me. And 90% of the time, the front of the house is not going to hear any difference. It looks great. The one guy I've seen touring with an SVT where you could really hear any difference was Hutch Hutchison playing with Bonnie Raitt. And I don't think his was a reissue. I think his was a 69, 70 or so. But they're also playing at very low volumes, and I'm sure he's got more than one. But his whole sound was a P bass into a SVT, and really just sounded like Muscle Shoals on steroids. Um, Getty used a Sands amp for the last 10 years of his career. He still sounded like Getty. There's so many good bass amp options these days that don't involve something that weighs 90 pounds that needs $800 worth of output tubes every couple weeks. I'm not shitting on SCTs. I'm just saying it is a rich man's game. And if you don't have deep pockets, there are better options. Whoa, thanks, Jason Hobbs. Just saw that. I'll get to all the super chat donations before we wrap up. I try to make sure that any super chat gets answered, certainly. But I don't want to be one of those channels where you have to pay me to answer questions. I try to answer all questions. Speaking of which, let's stop asking questions so I might be able to get through all the ones that have already been asked. We're right at 2 hours now, and I don't know if I'm able to get to all of them. I have the audio. I had the audio muted for a while I did intermission. It should be back now. Should have been back a long time ago. Tommy Mitchell France is up and coming. You want to ship me a 68 twin? Shoot, I'll look for your email. I'm sorry. I get several hundred legitimate emails a week, and I get so many thousand spam emails a week. I'm having a hard time playing catch up. I will look for that. I'm sorry. And Brad says I sound funny at 2 times speed. Well, I can do that in real time if it makes you feel better. Anyway, we're going to take another about 5-minute break or so. And if everyone can stop asking questions, I'll try to answer all the ones which have been asked. Actually, real fast, let me get to Jason Hobbs's question here. Jason Hobbs, thank you for the donation. He says, guitarists saying they absolutely love the sound of a particular amp, but say it's overpriced. You can get such and such for half that price. What's your thoughts? What makes that the $7,000 perfectly built amp worth it? My thoughts on that when I come back. That's an interesting question, and I'd like to take a little time to formulate a suitable response. For right now, my back teeth are floating, so we'll be back in just a moment. And we're back. So I had to think about the whole question of what makes an amp worth more than an amp that costs half as much. And let's ignore the $7,000 that was part of the question, because that's going to be a very small group of people. But the premise here is going to apply the same. Now we need to ignore market weirdnesses, collector desirability, who owned that amp, et cetera, et cetera. Let's look at just the intrinsic value of the amp and the intrinsic cost. Let's look at this 65 Deluxe Reverb behind me. An actual 65 Deluxe Reverb, if you go back to buy one in August of 1965 and you adjust for inflation, is about a $2,800 to $3,000 amp. Now you go to sweetwater.com right now, look up 65 Reissue Deluxe Reverb. You're going to look at about, 1,000, 1,100, something like that. You can get them used for less than that, but let's say new. So you got an amp that sold in 1965 for the equivalent of let's say $3,000, or you can get the new version for $1,100. Is the $1,100 amp half as good as the $3,000 amp? No. Is the $3,000 amp twice as good as the $1,100 amp? No, but kind of. And here's what I mean by that. In terms of the initial sound quality, and let's ignore the nasty C12K that most 65 reissues come with, because that's a terrible speaker. The amp itself is putting out a good sound, just the C12K shits on it. The sound is better with a $3,000 65 Deluxe. But it's better in ways that not all players will appreciate at first. It has a lower noise floor. It responds better to dynamic playing. It responds better to nuance. You're going to have better note separation within complex chords. None of these are things that beginner to intermediate guitarists will necessarily notice. They're going to be things that advanced players will notice pretty much immediately, even if they can't put their finger on it. They just know that this is a better realization of what they imagined in their head. A recording engineer is going to notice that because, hey, this one sits in the track because it has a certain frequency response. It's just, the other one just sounds like an amp. I can work with that. Okay, I'll run some EQs on it. So just out of the gate, yeah, it sounds a little bit better in ways that not everyone can appreciate. But then time comes in. This is an actual 65. How many of the reissues will still be going 60 years later? Not that many. Some will be going 30 years later, 40 years later if they're well maintained. But there's not a lot of longevity, and that's okay at an $1,100 price point. You buy an $1,100 amp and you get 10 to 20 years out of it. Hey, you beat the system these days, you know. So it can be worth it as long as you say, all right, if I get 10 years out of this, I got my money's worth. With the older amps, they can be continuously serviced and keep going. On that note, say if a volume pot needs to be changed on this 65 versus the 65 reissue, I can change a volume pot on a 65 in 20 minutes, total time. I've got to take a lot more out of the reissue. I've got to remove all the pots, the entire pots board. It's a lot more convoluted. I've got to desolder from a PCB. It takes longer to do well. I don't care if you've got a desoldering iron or just braid or a solder sucker. It's a more involved process than just disconnecting 3 wires. So you've got an hour to change one pot, and it's a pot that you have to order that fits a certain footprint on the PCB. It's not just, hey, I'll go in my bag of CTS or alpha pots and grab a 250K, hopefully 30% taper. So there's a lot of things, and that applies throughout the whole thing. If I need to change one resistor on an actual 65, it takes me 2 minutes to change that resistor. 3 minutes if there's a capacitor in parallel with it. I want to keep everything just really neat. I've got to pull everything, disconnect a bunch of wires, lift the board up. It's an hour-long process to change one resistor on a 65 reissue. So that adds up into repair time. And the reliability is just not there, like I mentioned. So there is a real, but not always noticeable to all people, sonic benefit to the better amp. But over time, you're going to have a lower cost of service. You're going to have less frequent service necessary, and it's going to keep going a lot longer. So your investment doesn't dissipate. In fact, that's when the market comes in. It can appreciate. So the amp, which on paper would be worth $500 today, is worth $2,500 today because people want that 65 deluxe reverb, even though it's a really old model. So that I guess that's about as far down that road as we need to go. But to certain players, the more expensive amp can be worth it. Let's just take away the whole. There are things which are overhyped. No Mesa should be worth $7,000, $3,000, but people pay that for those things. So, all right, scroll down too far. Let me get back to where we were. All right, got a super chat from Michael W. Buncher. Planning to put a WGS 10-inch G10. Oh, wait, I already read that one. Sorry. All right, I scrolled up instead of down. Sorry. It wasn't the beer. It's just I missed it. Where was I? No? Oh, that's right. I scrolled down to read that before, didn't I? That's right. So I'm still trying to find where I was. All right, there I am, where Brad's making fun of me being at 2 times speed. Ooh, Buzz Crumhunger says, that feeling when you bring home your JCM 600 from the pawn shop and blow a power transformer 10 minutes into it. Ouch. Let's see. I am trying to finish the research for the amps under $2,000 video, Lefty Mike. I think I've got all the amps selected that I want to talk about, and I've got images and prices of them jotted down. I've got I've got a rough draft of the script. I script those, otherwise I just end up rambling like I do on these live chats. And the trick is not to do an amps under X value video. The trick is to do it fairly concisely, though. People have attacked the existing ones saying I don't get to the point or I repeat myself too much or whatever. But I've long since given up on any hope of pleasing everyone all the time, and I don't really care. All right. Jason Weidner says, hi, Lyle. Hi, Jason. What are the most common reasons an AC, I guess AC30 TB, says ACT-B6 rectifier tube would arc? Read tube at issue persists. Can I take it to a tech? Is this an AC30 top boost? I don't know what an ACT-B6 is, but if it is an AC30, if it's the custom classic model and you're using the standby feature, that will kill the rectifier tube in there. So put in the comments if you mean which amp you mean and what rectifier tube you mean. It's either, but the other reasons a rectifier tube would arc would typically be a bad filter cap. So hopefully it's the standby gotcha, because that's easy. Just don't use it. Doc, it hurts when I do this. Brett Mativier, what's your opinion on the head cabinets for the Princeton Deluxe Reverbs? Is the reverb tank far enough away? If not, how much taller should they be? I don't know. I've not had many in. I don't know if I've had any head cab versions of those amps in. They need to be pretty far away. If you look at the head cab for the Bandmaster Reverb amps, they're just barely far enough away. I think another 4 inches would have been better. At which point you end up with a head that's almost as big as the combo. I don't see a lot of point to it. Um, reverb, traditional reverb tanks, that is, don't really fare well in heads. It's like the people who have the head versions of all the Dr. Z's, and the reverbs always hum. They're going to. They, if you're going to have reverb in a Dr. Z, make sure it's a combo or don't have reverb. Shannon Dickey says, hello, I have an AC30 CCH. Can it be modded to cascade the normal channel into the top boost channel? Yeah, of course it can. The question is, would you want to? I don't think it's a good option, both because you're not going to have fine control over things. 3 reasons. You're not going to have fine control over it. Number 2, if you modify it to do that well, one of the channels will then not have its best potential sound. 4 reasons. 3, it's no longer going to be an AC30. 4, and maybe most important, if you just need more gain, there's a world of overdrive and distortion pedals out there that'll get you there. There's no magic to cascading channels per se. You have to remember that the cascaded thing is a way to get all the distortion from the amp, but that started in 77 Marshalls. Might have been the late 76, but 77 Marshalls were the first cascaded ones, and they weren't cascaded anywhere to near to today's concept of high gain. But there weren't a lot of overdrive and distortion pedals on the market in 76, 77. You know, distortion plus some fuzz pedals, totally different thing. Today, man, there's so many things. You can get any number of Friedman pedals in front of that thing and have more gain than cascading the 2 channels would have given you. You can there's things you can get for $75 that would probably make you happy. It's hard for me to keep up with all the pedals on the market these days, but you would spend a lot more than a pedal's cost to modify that, and then you'd be left with something that no one else would want to buy. You may not be happy with it. You're kind of throwing your money in the wrong direction. But yeah, totally possible. Doc D. Kowalski Amplifier says aluminium dust cap. Yeah, I need to research what that speaker is in the Princeton there. I will get there. Cheese Pizza has an interesting question. Do you have any suggestions to troubleshoot motorboating / farting type noise from a Fender Twin Reverb vibrato circuit? Only occurs when vibrato is active. That's really interesting. It shouldn't motorboat or fart, but I'm thinking about the circuit for a second. Bear with me. That's really strange. I can't think of why that would inject any noise into the main circuit, because that's should just be varying the resistance to ground at a certain point in the vibrato circuit. And if the tremolo roach were to be, and I can't imagine how you would get noise injected there. All right, I'll tell you what it's got to be. It's got to be parasitic oscillation from the lead dress. It's got to be where you're getting a pulse in the wires, and moving the wires to probably fix it. But there's just not that much to that circuit if you look at it. It's it could be the lead dress of the wires going to the speed intensity pots. It could be the lead dress around V5, because on one side of V5 is V4, which is the reverb recovery stage and makeup gain stage. and then the other side is V6, which is your phase inverter. So I imagine 10, 15 minutes of patient moving wires with the chopstick would find, oh, that makes it worse, that makes it better. That's just an unusual symptom to have. But farting type noise, I'd want to hear that. And, please don't send me fart sound samples, people, but that's an unusual problem. But I would imagine that's related to the lead dress. Lee, I'm gonna ignore your stereo tube power amp question because I don't have much experience with them, but I'm sure others will. I think you understand. Um, C-Fib says, my Swart Space Tone Reverb, a dead ringer for the one in your repair video, has a baseline 60 cycle hum. Really enjoying that video and how quiet the unit was. Should I send mine to you for repair? I would be glad to, but first contact Swart, see if it's under warranty or if they have a authorized service center near to you. It's a very well built amp, but it is a very simple amp. And there's a very short list of suspects for 60 cycle hum in one of those. I am far from the only tech who could fix that for you. The first thing you need to do is try a different power tube. But given that it is and preamp tubes, it could be picked up in the preamp tube as well, just to make sure you don't have just a bum tube before you send it to any tech. But while it's perfectly executed, simple design, it is a simple design, so that could be easily fixed. But if Swart cannot help you and there's no other option closer to you, I would be delighted to fix that for you. Low quality guitar video says, I support a death cap episode. That's not stuff you hear on every channel out there, guys. Hey, Buck Wild, I'm glad you're here. I just spent some time in Tennessee and can say the barbecue was decent. Decent, really. He went with Wentz Barbecue. Good. Where in Tennessee were you? Because the rest of Tennessee has decent barbecue. We're in Memphis, man. Memphis has got world class barbecue. Memphis, Austin, Kansas City, and then there's every place else. All right, St. Louis just squeaks in, and I'm being generous. All right, Clover is a guy. Sorry, I just been just being making sure. Don't want to assume that everyone in here is a dude. Uh, it is kind of depressing sometimes when I realize I have a couple of thousand, 33 point something thousand subscribers, most of which are middle-aged white guys. And there's nothing wrong with middle-aged white guys. I am one myself, but I'd like to have both a more diverse audience and a more diverse in range, because I don't want my audience to all get heart attacks and go away. I need some young blood in here. So hey, if anyone in here is under 30, let me know. I'd like to know if I'm just talking to the rest of the people with equity or whether there are young people in here too. Um, I hope that there are. I hope that I'm not just interesting to older people, specifically older gentlemen, because it sounds like um, set up for so many bad jokes. Soy faced clickbait idiots. Well, I don't think I'm soy faced. I'm milk faced. I was at a coffee shop the other day, Brad, and I ordered a cafe au lait. And they said, "Do you want that whole or soy?" And I said, I ordered cafe au lait, not cafe au merde. And they didn't get it. But anyway, Jimmy Joe Fine says, thanks for the answer on my basement. It's an AB165. I had it serviced recently, so I'll check on the preamp tubes. Also got shocked off a mic stand, even though it grounded power cable. What the hell? Well, make sure that it no longer has the death cap, because the death cap can give you problems even with a grounded chassis. Number one. Number two, there's no guarantee that the outlet you were plugged into on that stage was grounded unless you verified it with an outlet tester. Everyone who gigs, every guitarist, anyone who gigs with devices, keyboards, bass, guitars, whatever, should verify all outlets on the stages that they use. And then there's no guarantee that the PA itself was grounded. So if the PA has a faulty ground, that mic body could be live until it finds a ground source, which is going to be through you, your hand, your lips, whatever, to wherever you're plugged into. So you need to not only verify that your amplifier is properly grounded, you verify that your outlets that you're using on stage are properly grounded, everything is wired correctly. You don't want to have the hot where the ground's supposed to be, and that does happen. And third, at that point, then you need to say, if you're playing guitar, take your voltmeter and measure for DC. I'm sorry, for AC between the strings of your guitar and the microphone before you touch that microphone. It's not that uncommon. There would be a massive potential between a microphone body and your guitar strings because there's a fault in the PA somewhere. And if any of those things are not right, don't play. Leave. Tell all your musician friends, we don't play there until they value our lives. G-Shock Watch fan. Well, here's a video for you, man. All right, G-Shock Watch fan. What are the odds? Opinion on Cornell hand-wired UK amps. I have no direct opinion because I have no direct experience with one. I would love to. I'd love to have a Cornell in to check out. But I have heard wonderful things, and all the photos I've seen of them indicate an extraordinarily high build quality. And so I'm inclined to think that they are awesome, as is Paul Stafford Cook, who uses one. Paul is a phenomenal player, really great personality, and I enjoy his videos very much. I think he very much undervalues his own creativity and knowledge. He may not know the names for all the things that he does in terms of the theory, but he hears somewhat, I would say, hears fairly advanced theoretical concepts and just applies them. And I don't know whether he is putting on a pretense of being naive about it, or whether he's just one of those guys like, oh, say Paul McCartney, who doesn't know he's using the Phrygian mode, but he sure as hell does, and he uses it perfectly. Just because his ears say that's what that should be. If that note goes here, then this other note needs to go here. I really enjoy Paul's videos, and it's not just about, oh, here's how to play this thing on guitar, but just watching someone really react with some excitement and joy in what he's doing. You know, I get that same sense from oh, what's his name? Chris Buck. Chris Buck has hundreds of thousands more viewers than Paul, but I think they both are doing similarly wonderful things. Yeah, Chris Buck's got better technique. I mean, he's really got some advanced stuff going on, but I think just in terms of the joy of expression through instrument, Paul's got that in spades, and I really enjoy his videos. If you don't know Paul Stafford Cook, if you guys don't know Chris Buck, go check them out. Really a lot of fun. Chris Buck has a little bit of that thing that Jeff Beck had. Jeff Beck had more of that thing than I think anyone else will ever have, where you're like, yeah, I just saw how he did it, but how did he do it? No, no, I see that. I see that. I see that. But how? You know, Let's see. Kieran S says, "Hey, Lyle, love the show and all your great tips." Thanks, Kieran, very much. Only a player myself. There's no such thing as only a player. Without players, guys like me would be off selling real estate or something that makes money. So thank you for keeping us broke. But have a deep interest in valve amps. Just wondering if you'd have any tips on taming a Trainwreck type circuit. Cheers from Ireland. Yeah. First of all, it's funny that the people go to a train wreck because they want the untamed, just the pure raw aggression, and they're fantastic when they're well executed. But then after a while, they're like, "Yeah, that's great, but can I use it for other things?" In which case, it has way too much gain, hence too much noise for most other things. But there's an easy way to switch off an extra gain stage in that amp. You can take that amp to any good tech in your area, and if you don't have a good tech in Ireland, the closest good tech that I would recommend would be Roland um, uh, Lumby, Lumby in Manchester. I'm sure there are others closer, but I don't know every tech in the UK and Britain and Ireland. Sorry, but Roland in Manchester is fantastic. But if any of a good tech looks at a train wreck, they're like, okay, it's a Fender, and it's essentially one channel of an AB165 Bassman, but instead of a 470K local negative feedback resistor, it just has a voltage divider to give a lot more gain than it otherwise would, but not as much as it's possible to have. And that's where the whole thing works. You can just bypass that one extra gain stage that can be easily made switchable. I'm assuming you're talking about a train wreck replica. If it's an actual train wreck that Ken made, don't touch it. If you want something else, buy something else. But if it's a replica, any good tech can bypass that extra gain stage. Might need to fudge some voltage divider things in there depending on the model, so you have a consistency. But you can make that thing basically have a beautiful blackface Fender non-reverb, non-tremolo channel, and then all the mega gains nastiness you ever want. Yeah, Brad, the AC 10C1 is crazy. It's like two people designed it and didn't talk to each other. Yeah, it's just nuts. I can't imagine whoever did the L&D 150 parts of the circuit would have signed off on that 5-volt op amp supply. Farmer David, I agree with you about Ampeg and Gibson to an extent. Certain Gibsons, I think, sound better than certain Fenders. But yeah, they're bare to work on. They were built cheap and to get out the door really fast. And Ampeg and Gibson both. There's the schematic, and there's what actually left the factory. And people talk about Friday amps. They had Friday months. I think we're going to need to start winding this up. We're at 2 hours and 35 minutes. I usually go 2.5 on these, but I've been having fun. So I'm going to read through down here and see if there's anything that I really need to address this week. Yeah, Brad agrees on 240. I'm going to scroll down and see if I missed any super chats. We're winding this up. I'm not going to be able to get all the questions. I'm very glad that everyone joins us here for these. It means a lot to me. It lets me know I'm not just shouting into the void. And I appreciate you all, even if I'm not able to get to all your questions today. It's one of the reasons I thought I'd just do a Tuesday afternoon with relatively little advance notice, so there'd be fewer people here, so I could answer a higher percentage of questions, but it didn't work out that way. I'm a victim of my own success. You have to have a sense of humor about this kind of thing. I am kind of disappointed that I missed the opportunity to do a thank you for 33 and a third thousand subscribers about a week ago. Wow, some really great questions. I'm sorry I can't get to them all. In the past, I was going back and answering any questions I didn't get to in the live chat, and I've got too many questions here to do that. I'm too busy. Jeff Golf, Hefe Golf says, first of all, thank you for the donation. Sorry I'm late. You may have addressed it already. What is the status of the Excalibur line? Are there any more styles of amps in the work? I'm trying to get some chassis stuff done to talk to a potential chassis maker, which could solve the chassis and faceplate option at the same time and give me the freedom to change the design a bit to do some things I'd like to do with that model, because the existing one was built using a Mojo Tone chassis, so I was kind of limited in what I could do with existing chassis and where the holes are and where I could work around that. And given the entire supply chain still being in flux, I don't think now is a time for me to come out with anything for sale when I don't know that I can get stuff. And I don't mean to use that as just as an excuse, but put it this way: I ordered a Yamaha RevStar last May. I was supposed to get it in July. Then I was supposed to get it in September. Then I was supposed to get it in December. Then I was supposed to get it in January. And I spoke to the rep last week, and now it's next August. So Yamaha has been unable to get a handle on their supply chain. I wanted to get a Sony digital camera a year and a half ago. Sony could not make that camera until about 3 months ago because there was a chip shortage because of COVID. And if Sony and Yamaha, who are each the 8,000-pound gorillas in their respective industries, cannot control supply chains, it makes me feel a little bit better about my own ability to get anything to market. The first one the first one was built before COVID really hit hard. And then I've got a second one that's almost built, but the faceplate supplier that I use went out of business. And he sent me the last faceplates he ever made, and he botched them. And, I hope he's well. If he sees this, I have nothing but good thoughts towards him, but it's a shame it ended up that way. And what I need is a very specialized thing. And every time I do Google searches, I just find the same guys making acrylic faceplates. That would be fine for a Marshall clone that came out of someone's kitchen, but I don't want thick acrylic plates. The thick acrylic plates mean you can't use tooth washers on pots, and the thin acrylic plates where you can use tooth washers, the acrylic breaks when you tighten things up. There's a lot of things that go into this, and most people don't take into consideration. It's easy to make one fantastic amp, but to say, all right, now I'm going to make 10, 20, 30, 40 of them, it gets tricky. And so the project is not on hold, but on a long pause while I try to get some I's crossed and T's dotted. On that note, I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank Brad's Guitar Garage for modding and for answering some questions I could not get to. And like I said, when we're signed off here, if you want more great content like this, check out Brad's channel. I think you can click on his username there, and it should take you to him. If not, it's spelled Brad's Guitar Garage, or Garage to some of you. So I'm going to click the end stream button, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Be well, be safe, and I may talk to you one more time before Europe.